The mediation room smelled like burnt coffee and false promises. I sat across from Darren in the sterile conference room at Henderson Associates, watching him adjust his Italian silk tie with the same precision he used when preparing for client presentations. 8 years of marriage had taught me to read his tells, the slight tightening around his eyes when he was about to lie, the way his left hand drummed against his thigh when he was calculating his next move. Today, both tells were working overtime. Avery contributed very little to the actual business operations, Darren said, his voice carrying that practiced charm that had once made me believe I was lucky to be chosen by him. She handled some of the technical drafting, but I managed all client relationships, secured the contracts, developed the business strategy. Caldwell and Lynn Designs is essentially my creation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My pen stopped moving across the legal pad. The words hung in the air like a blueprint for demolition. My demolition. Across the polished conference table, Darren's attorney, a sharp-suited woman named Patricia Vaughn, nodded approvingly while scribbling notes. My own lawyer, David Chen, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mrs. Caldwell, Patricia continued, using my married name with deliberate emphasis, my client is prepared to offer you a generous settlement, $30,000. And the Honda Civic. Given your limited contribution to the firm's success, this represents more than fair compensation. I looked up from my notepad, my expression carefully neutral. The Honda Civic, the car I'd bought with my own money 3 years before I met Darren. The $30,000 less than I'd spent on office furniture for the firm's downtown headquarters. The headquarters I'd designed, in the building I'd found, with the financing I'd structured. I see, I said quietly. And what about the intellectual property? The design patents? The client relationships I've maintained for 6 years? Darren leaned forward, his smile sharp as a T-square edge. Avery, let's be realistic. You're talented with auto CAD, I'll give you that. But the big picture stuff, the business development, the strategic vision, that's not really your strong suit. You've always been more comfortable in the background. The background. I'd spent 8 years in the background, watching Darren present my designs to clients, accept awards for my innovations, build his reputation on my blueprints. The Riverside Commons project that won the Atlanta Architecture Award last year, my sustainable design, my engineering solutions, my 3 months of 18-hour days. The veterans housing development that earned us national recognition, my research, my community outreach, my careful attention to accessibility requirements. The firm will retain all existing contracts and intellectual property, Patricia announced, sliding a document across the table. Mr. Caldwell has already filed the necessary paperwork to restructure as a sole proprietorship. My pen stilled completely. I read the header, Caldwell Designs LLC dissolution of partnership. Partnership. As if I'd ever been considered an equal partner, rather than what I now understood I'd been unpaid labor with benefits. This is quite generous, David murmured, though his tone suggested he disagreed with his own words. Perhaps we should review the terms privately. I'd like to see the documentation for this restructuring, I said, my voice still carefully level. When was the partnership dissolved? Darren's drumming finger paused. The paperwork was filed last month. Just a formality, really. Streamlining the business structure for tax purposes. Last month, while I was in Taiwan visiting my mother, helping her recover from surgery. While I'd been coordinating our projects remotely, managing client communications, and preparing presentations for 3 different proposals. While I'd been trusting my husband to handle the business side of our business. I'll need copies of all filing documents, I said, and I'd like to postpone any decisions until I've reviewed them. Patricia's smile tightened. Mrs. Caldwell, my client is being extremely generous. This offer has a limited window. Then I suppose we'll need to schedule another meeting, I replied, closing my notepad with a soft snap. David, could you request all relevant business documents from the past year? Partnership agreements, tax filings, client contracts, intellectual property registrations. Darren's charming mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something colder underneath. Avery, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We both know how this ends. Take the settlement. Start fresh. You're young enough to rebuild. Rebuild. As if the 8 years I'd spent building Caldwell and Lynn designs had been practice rounds. As if the reputation I'd earned in Atlanta's architectural community was a hobby I could abandon and restart like a weekend garden project. "I'll be in touch," I said, standing and extending my hand to Patricia, professional, controlled, giving no indication that my carefully constructed world was collapsing around me like a structure with compromised foundations. The elevator ride down from the 15th floor felt endless. David stood beside me, his reflection in the polished steel doors showing the same stunned expression I was careful not to wear. When the doors opened to the parking garage, he finally spoke. "Avery, I have to ask, did you know about the partnership dissolution?" "No," I said simply. "I did not. This is unusual. Typically, both partners would need to sign off on such fundamental changes to business structure. I'll need to research the original partnership agreement, see what provisions exist for unilateral action." We walked to our cars in the dim garage lighting. The Honda Civic, my generous settlement, sat between a BMW and a Mercedes, looking suddenly smaller than I remembered. "David," I called as he reached his car, "how long would it take to get copies of all our business filings from the state?" "A few days. Maybe a week." "Why?" "I want to understand exactly what I'm looking at," I said. "All of it." The drive home to our house in Buckhead took 30 minutes through afternoon traffic. Our house. The house I'd designed, though Darren's name was the only one on the deed. The mortgage I'd qualified for with my credit score, though somehow my name wasn't on the loan documents either. Pattern recognition had always been one of my strengths as an architect, seeing how individual elements connected to form the whole structure. Now, sitting in Atlanta traffic, I was beginning to see a pattern I'd been too close to recognize. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, its clean lines and sustainable features a testament to my belief that good design could improve people's lives. Darren's BMW sat in the driveway, which meant he was home early, unusual for him, especially on a day when he'd just declared war on his wife. I found him in his study, the room I'd designed as a quiet retreat, but which had become his throne room. He was on the phone, his back to the door, speaking in the low, confidential tone he used for important business calls. "No, the transition will be seamless," he was saying. "She's not going to be a problem. Trust me. I know how to handle Avery." I stood in the doorway, watching him gesture at the wall of awards for my work, my designs, my innovations. The Atlanta Architecture Award hung directly behind his desk, positioned so it would be visible in video calls. My name was listed as co-recipient in tiny print at the bottom, barely readable from a distance. "The intellectual property is all secured," Darren continued. "Clean transfer, no complications. Caldwell Designs will be operating normally within the week." Caldwell Designs, not Caldwell and Lynn. Not even acknowledging that the and Lynn had ever existed. He must have sensed my presence because he turned around, his expression shifting to the slightly guilty look of a man caught in something he couldn't quite explain. "I have to go," he said into the phone. "We'll finish this tomorrow." "How did the meeting go?" he asked, as if he hadn't been there, as if he were asking about a job interview rather than the dissolution of my professional life. "Interesting," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. The chair I'd chosen for its clean lines and comfort, back when I believed this was our shared space. I learned quite a bit about business restructuring and partnership law. Something flickered across his face, annoyance, maybe, or calculation. "Look, I know this is hard, but sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone involved." "Everyone involved," I repeated. "And who exactly is everyone in this scenario?" "Avery, don't make this personal. This is just business." "My business," I said quietly. "My designs, my clients, my reputation. How is that not personal?" He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. The sound used to be comforting, now it sounded like a warning. "Our business was built on my relationships, my networking, my ability to sell your technical skills. You're good at what you do, but you've never understood the bigger picture, the politics, the presentation, the persuasion. That's what I bring to the table, technical skills." As if 6 years of graduate education, a license to practice architecture, and recognition from the American Institute of Architects were equivalent to knowing how to use a calculator. "I see," I said. "So when the AIA selected your Riverside Commons project for the Sustainability Award, That was because of your networking? Partly, yes. These awards are about relationships as much as design quality. You know that. I didn't know that. I'd thought they were about innovation, environmental responsibility, and architectural excellence. I'd thought the award recognized the solar integration system I'd spent 6 months perfecting, the water reclamation design that reduced the building's environmental footprint by 40%, the natural lighting solutions that eliminated the need for artificial light during peak hours. What about the Veterans Housing Project? I asked. The one that got us featured in Architectural Digest? Was that also about your relationships? His jaw tightened slightly. That project succeeded because I understood how to present it to city planners, how to navigate the approval process, how to manage the political aspects. The design was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The design was just one piece. The design that had taken me 8 months to complete, working with veterans advocacy groups to understand accessibility needs, researching trauma-informed architecture, creating spaces that could help heal rather than just house. The design that had earned us national recognition and 3 new contracts. I'm learning so much today, I said, standing up. About business structure, about partnership, law, about the difference between technical skills and vision. Avery, I hope you'll consider the settlement offer. It really is generous. Oh, I'm considering everything, I replied, very carefully. I left him in his study and walked to my home office, the small room at the back of the house where I kept my drafting table, my reference books, my backup drives containing every project I'd worked on for the past 8 years. The room Darren never entered because it was full of technical stuff that didn't interest him. I opened my laptop and began pulling up files, partnership agreements, business licenses, intellectual property registrations, tax documents, bank account statements, the digital paper trail of our professional life together. And as I scrolled through document after document, the pattern became clearer. My name disappearing from contracts over the past 6 months. Design credits reassigned. Copyright registrations filed solely in Darren's name. A systematic, methodical erasure of my professional existence. But Darren had made one crucial error in his calculation. He'd assumed I was too trusting, too passive, too comfortable in the background to notice what he was doing. He'd forgotten that I was an architect, someone trained to see how individual elements connected to form larger structures. Someone who understood that the most important parts of any building were often the ones you couldn't see from the outside. The foundation, the support beams, the electrical systems that kept everything functioning. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called into years. Elias Romero's office. This is Sarah. This is Avery Lynn, I said. I need to schedule a meeting with Elias. Tomorrow, if possible. Of course, Miss Lynn. Should I tell him what this is regarding? I looked around my office, at the awards on the wall, the blueprints tacked to the drafting board, the evidence of everything I'd built and was about to lose. Tell him it's about intellectual property protection, I said, and that it's urgent. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office, surrounded by the work that had defined my adult life. Outside, I could hear Darren on another phone call, his voice carrying the confident tone of a man who believed he'd already won. He'd underestimated me for 8 years, underestimated my intelligence, my strength, my ability to see the bigger picture. He'd assumed that because I preferred designing to politicking, because I worked quietly rather than loudly, because I built rather than demolished, I was weak. Tomorrow, I would begin showing him exactly how wrong he was. But tonight, I had work to do. I had a structure to analyze, weak points to identify, and a foundation to examine. Because if there was one thing I'd learned in 8 years of architecture, it was this: the most elegant demolition wasn't about destroying everything at once. It was about identifying the single critical support beam that held everything else up, and then removing it with surgical precision. Elias Romero's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in Virginia Highland, the kind of adaptive reuse project I'd always admired. The exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors spoke to someone who understood that the best renovations honored the original structure while creating something entirely new. When I'd recommended Elias for the conversion 3 years ago, I hadn't imagined I'd one day be sitting across from him as a client rather than a colleague. You look different, he said, settling behind his desk with 2 cups of coffee. Older, more focused. I feel like I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years, I replied, accepting the cup. The coffee was good, strong enough to cut through the exhaustion I'd been carrying since yesterday's mediation. Elias had been my intern during his final year at Emory Law, back when he was 25 and idealistic enough to believe that legal work could change the world. Now 31, he'd built a practice specializing in intellectual property and small business law, the kind of unglamorous work that kept creative people from being exploited by those who understood contracts better than they understood art. Tell me what's happening, he said, opening a fresh legal pad. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared during my sleepless night, printouts of contracts, registration documents, financial records. 8 years of my professional life reduced to 2 inches of paper. My husband filed for divorce and claims I contributed nothing to our architectural firm, I began. He's demanding full ownership of the business, all intellectual property, and essentially every asset we've accumulated during our marriage. Elias's pen paused over his notepad. That's ambitious of him. What does your divorce attorney say? That I should consider the settlement offer, $30,000 and my car, for half of an architectural firm that's been operating successfully for 6 years. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Avery, you won the Atlanta Architecture Award last year. Your sustainable design work has been featured in 3 national publications. What does he claim he contributed? Client relationships, business development, strategic vision. I opened the folder and spread the documents across his desk. The problem is, I'm starting to think he may be right about one thing. I never paid attention to the business side. I trusted him to handle contracts, legal filings, financial structure. I focused on the work. Elias picked up the first document, our original partnership agreement from 2018. His expression grew more serious as he read. This is a 50-50 partnership, he said finally. Equal ownership, equal decision-making authority, equal financial responsibility. Both signatures required for major business decisions. That's what I thought. But you said he filed to restructure as a sole proprietorship. I handed him the second set of documents, the ones David had requested from the state. Filed last month, while I was in Taiwan. Apparently, I signed off on dissolving the partnership. Elias examined the dissolution paperwork, his lawyer's eye catching details I'd missed. This signature doesn't look right, he said, holding the document up to the light. The pen pressure is inconsistent, and the loop on your L is different from your signature on the original partnership agreement. Different how? Your real signature has a very specific flourish on the L. See here. He pointed to the original document. It's distinctive, probably something you developed in school, but this dissolution signature, he showed me. The newer document, the L is simpler, more rushed, like someone trying to copy your signature but not quite getting the muscle memory right. I stared at the 2 signatures side by side. He was right, the dissolution signature looked like a decent forgery, but it wasn't mine. Can we prove that? Possibly. We'd need a forensic handwriting analysis, which takes time and money. But there's something else. He pulled out another document from the stack. This trademark registration for Caldwell Designs was filed 2 weeks ago. It specifically states that any previous use of Caldwell and Lynn designs was unauthorized and that the registrant has exclusive rights to all associated intellectual property. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Unauthorized use? According to this filing, you never had legal permission to use the Caldwell name in the business. It claims you were essentially operating under a false trademark for 6 years. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Darren hadn't just erased me from our future, he was trying to erase me from our past. According to his legal narrative, I'd been a fraud from the beginning, someone who'd attached my name to his business without permission. But that's not how it happened, I said. We chose the name together. I suggested Lynn and Caldwell alphabetically, and he wanted his name first. We agreed on Caldwell and Lynn as a compromise. Do you have any documentation of that conversation? Emails? Texts? Notes? I thought back to 2018, to the excitement of starting our own firm, to the countless late-night conversations about business names and logo designs and 5-year plans. We'd been married for 2 years then, still in the phase where I believed his ambition and my talent were equal contributions to our shared future. It was all verbal. We were married, planning a business together. I trusted him. Elias made a note on his pad. Trust is beautiful in marriage. In business, it's a liability. But we can work with this. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and Began sketching what looked like an organizational chart. Let's approach this systematically. First, we need to establish your intellectual property rights independent of the partnership. When did you start developing the designs that made your firm successful? Some of the concepts go back to graduate school. My thesis project was on sustainable urban housing, which became the foundation for most of our residential work. Good. Do you have copies of your thesis, your academic work, your early design portfolios? Everything. I keep digital archives of all my projects. Going back to my undergrad portfolio. Excellent. We'll file copyright registrations for all your original designs, starting with the earliest work and moving forward chronologically. If Darren wants to claim ownership of your intellectual property, he'll need to prove he created it. Elias's pen moved quickly across the page, creating a timeline of actions. Second, we'll examine every contract your firm signed over the past 6 years. If your signature was forged on the partnership dissolution, it's likely he forged your signature on other documents too. How do we prove that? We request copies of everything from your clients, your bank, your insurance company, the state licensing board. Then we compare signatures. If there's a pattern of forgery, we have grounds for criminal charges, not just civil litigation. Criminal charges. I hadn't thought about Darren's actions in terms of criminal law, but Elias was right. Forging signatures, filing false trademark claims, fraudulent business practices, these weren't just civil disputes. They were crimes. Third, Elias continued, we establish your individual credibility in the architecture community. Who knows your work? Who can testify that you were the creative force behind the firm's success? Clients mostly. Contractors who worked on my designs. Other architects who've seen my presentations at conferences. We'll need affidavits from all of them. The more evidence we have that you were the actual architect behind the firm's reputation, the stronger our case. I watched him work, this young lawyer who'd once copied my drafting techniques and asked endless questions about sustainable design. His approach was methodical, careful, built on the same kind of systematic thinking I used when designing complex structures. There's something else, I said. Last night, I found some interesting discrepancies in our financial records. Elias looked up. What kind of discrepancies? I pulled out my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd created during my sleepless night. For the past 6 months, client payments have been deposited into accounts I don't have access to. I thought it was just a new business account Darren had set up for tax purposes, but when I tried to log into our shared financial dashboard, my access had been revoked. He's been redirecting business income to personal accounts? It looks that way, and there's more. I clicked to another tab on the spreadsheet. 3 of our biggest clients have been invoiced for work that was never completed. The invoices show my name as the project architect, but I never worked on those projects. Elias leaned forward, studying the screen. He's been billing clients for work he claimed you did, but which was never actually done, or done by someone else. I found email correspondence with a freelance architect in Jacksonville who seems to be handling overflow work. But the clients are being billed as if I'm doing the work personally. That's fraud, Elias said flatly. Possibly multiple counts of fraud. We spent the next hour going through the financial records, identifying patterns of suspicious activity. By the time we finished, Elias had filled 6 pages with notes and potential legal violations. Avery, he said finally, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay, what do you want from this situation? Do you want to save your marriage, get a fair divorce settlement, or completely destroy your husband's career? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I considered the question while looking out his office window at the Atlanta skyline. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel were buildings I'd designed, spaces where people lived and worked and built their own lives. The question wasn't what I wanted to do to Darren, it was what I wanted to do for myself. I want my name back, I said finally. My reputation, my work, my professional identity. I want to practice architecture under my own name, with my own clients, building my own legacy. And if that means destroying Darren's career in the process? I thought about 8 years of sitting in the background while he accepted credit for my innovations. 8 years of watching him build his reputation on my blueprints. 8 years of believing that my contribution was less valuable than his, that my talent was just a supporting element in his larger vision. Then I guess he should have thought about that before he decided I was disposable. Elias smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since I'd walked into his office. That's the Avery I remember. The one who redesigned the entire structure of the Morrison building project because she found a more elegant solution to days before the deadline. You remember that? I remember everything about working with you. The way you'd spend hours perfecting a detail that no one else would notice but which made the entire design stronger. The way you'd stay late to help me understand complex engineering concepts. The way you treated everyone on the team like their contributions mattered. He closed his notepad and looked at me directly. Darren made a mistake when he decided you were just technical support. He forgot that you're an architect, someone who understands how to build things, but also how to take them apart. So what's our first step? We file copyright registrations for all your original designs today, before he can claim ownership of intellectual property that predates your partnership. Elias stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a stack of forms. I'll need digital copies of everything: your thesis, your academic projects, your early portfolio work, any designs you created before 2018. I can get those to you by tomorrow. Good. And Avery? He paused at the door. This is going to get ugly. Darren's not going to give up easily, and he has resources. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the mediation room, about Darren's confident smile as he'd dismiss my contributions as technical skills, about the awards on his office wall, about the years I'd spent invisible while he built his reputation on my work. I've been preparing for this my whole life, I said. I just didn't know it. That afternoon, I drove to Georgia Tech's architecture library, where I'd spent countless hours as a graduate student. The building hadn't changed, still the same. Brutalist concrete exterior hiding surprisingly warm interior spaces. Still the same smell of old books and fresh coffee from the cafe on the first floor. I found a quiet corner and began the process of digitizing my academic work. My thesis on sustainable urban housing. My studio projects on adaptive reuse and green renovation. My early experiments with solar integration and natural lighting systems. The foundation of everything I'd built since graduation. As I scanned each document, I realized that Darren was right about one thing: I had been comfortable in the background. But not because I was weak or lacking in vision, because I'd been focused on the work itself, on the craft of creating spaces that improved people's lives. That focus had been a strength, not a weakness. And now it was time to use it. My phone buzzed with a text from Darren. Hope you're reconsidering the settlement offer. Clock is ticking. I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Let him think I was still the passive, trusting wife who'd spent 8 years making his career possible. He was about to learn that architects didn't just design buildings. Sometimes they designed justice. The call came at 7:30 in the morning, 3 days after my meeting with Elias. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing copyright registration forms over coffee, when my phone rang with an unknown Atlanta number. Miss Lynn, this is Natalie Brooks. I worked with your firm on the West Side Veterans Housing Project. I remembered her immediately, a former Army engineer turned nonprofit director, the kind of person who spoke in precise, measured sentences, and asked exactly the right questions during design meetings. She'd been instrumental in helping me understand the specific needs of veterans transitioning to civilian housing, sharing insights about trauma-informed design that had shaped the entire project. Of course, Natalie, how can I help you? I think the question is how I can help you, she said. I heard about the divorce proceedings. Word travels fast in the nonprofit community. I set down my coffee cup, suddenly alert. What exactly did you hear? That Darren is claiming sole ownership of Caldwell and Lynn Designs. That he's telling people you were essentially a junior associate who helped with drafting. Her voice carried an edge I remembered from our project meetings, the tone of someone who'd served in combat and had no patience for lies. That's an interesting interpretation of events. It's complete bullshit, Natalie said bluntly. And I have proof. She paused, and I heard the sound of papers rustling. Miss Lynn, can we meet in person? What I have to show you is better. Discuss face to face. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Grant Park, far enough from downtown that we were unlikely to encounter anyone from Atlanta's architectural community. I arrived first, choosing a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances, a habit I'd developed during years of client meetings where discretion was essential. Natalie arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it had survived multiple deployment zones. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, with graying hair and the kind of steady presence that made you understand why soldiers had followed her into dangerous situations. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, settling into the chair across from me. I debated whether to reach out, but after what I discovered yesterday, I couldn't stay silent. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a manila folder. "3 weeks ago, I received a call from someone claiming to be you. The caller said there had been some changes to our project documentation and that we needed to update our records." Changes to the documentation? Specifically, changes to the architect of record. The caller said that due to a clerical error, my records incorrectly showed you as the primary architect for the West Side project. They said the correct architect of record should be Darren Caldwell, and that I needed to update our grant applications accordingly. My stomach dropped. The West Side Veterans Housing Project had been my most complex and personally meaningful work. 18 months of research, community engagement, and innovative design solutions. It was the project that had earned us national recognition and 3 subsequent contracts. "I hope you didn't make those changes," I said. "I told them I'd need documentation before changing anything," Natalie replied. "Then I called your office to confirm." That's when things got interesting. She pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table between us. "The person who answered said you were unavailable, but that Darren could explain the situation." I recorded the conversation. She pressed play, and Darren's voice filled the small space between us, smooth and confident as always. "Natalie, thanks for calling. I know this is confusing, but there was an error in our original project documentation. Avery assisted with some of the technical aspects of the design, but I was the architect of record for the West Side project. She's not actually licensed to practice independently in Georgia." I felt the blood drain from my face. Not licensed to practice independently. It was a complete lie. I'd maintained my Georgia architecture license since graduating from tech, with all continuing education requirements current. Darren's voice continued from the recorder. "The licensing board requires that all projects list the properly licensed architect as the primary designer. Since Avery works under my license, technically I'm responsible for all design decisions and approvals." "But Mr. Caldwell," Natalie's voice responded, "I have emails from Miss Lynn discussing specific design elements, material choices, and code compliance issues." She seemed very knowledgeable about Georgia building codes. "Oh, she is knowledgeable," Darren replied, his tone slightly patronizing. "That's why I keep her on the team." But knowledge and legal responsibility are different things. The state requires that a licensed architect sign off on all plans, and that's my role in the firm. "I see. And Miss Lynn is aware of these documentation changes?" There was a brief pause before Darren answered. "She's aware that we're correcting some administrative errors in our filing systems." "Look, Natalie, between you and me, Avery's going through some personal issues right now. Divorce proceedings can be difficult. She might not be thinking clearly about business matters." Natalie clicked off the recorder. That conversation happened yesterday afternoon. I stared at the device, my mind racing through the implications. Darren wasn't just claiming credit for my work, he was actively rewriting history, contacting clients to change official records, and suggesting I was mentally unstable due to our divorce. "There's more," Natalie said quietly. She pulled out another document, a photocopy of what looked like architectural plans. After that call, I pulled our complete project file. "This is a copy of the final design approval form for the West Side project." I examined the document. It was the official form submitted to the city for building permit approval, dated 18 months ago. In the space marked architect of record, someone had signed Darren's name, but the signature was clearly mine. "I forged his signature on the approval forms," I said, understanding flooding through me. "He was out of town for the deadline, and we needed the permits submitted immediately to avoid delays. He told me to sign his name since he was the listed principal architect." "So legally, you signed his name to official city documents?" "Yes, but with his explicit permission. It's not uncommon when partners are traveling or unavailable for deadlines." Natalie's expression was grim. "According to Georgia licensing law, that's a serious violation. Only the named architect can sign official documents, even with permission." If the licensing board found out, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the coffee shop's air conditioning. They could revoke my license. They could revoke both your licenses. But that's not the worst part. She pulled out one more document, a recent email chain. Yesterday evening, after our phone conversation, I received this follow-up from Darren. The email was brief and professional. Natalie, further to our conversation, I wanted to clarify that the signature irregularities on the West Side project documents will be corrected in our updated filings. Unfortunately, it appears that Avery may have signed my name to several official documents without proper authorization. I'm working with our legal team to address this matter appropriately. I wanted to give you advance notice in case there are any questions from city regulators. Best regards, Darren. He's setting you up, Natalie said, making it look like you forged his signature without permission, while simultaneously claiming credit for your work. The elegant viciousness of it was breathtaking. Darren was creating a narrative where I was both incompetent and criminal, someone who'd forged signatures and falsely claimed credit for work I wasn't qualified to do. If he succeeded, I wouldn't just lose our firm. I'd lose my license to practice architecture anywhere. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because 18 months ago, you spent 3 hours walking through our building site with me, explaining how the natural lighting system would help veterans with PTSD manage sleep disorders. You knew every detail of that design because you created it. Darren showed up for the ribbon cutting and couldn't answer basic questions about material choices. Natalie closed her portfolio and leaned forward. Also because I've seen enough good soldiers destroyed by commanding officers who took credit for their work. I won't watch it happen to you. What do you think I should do? Fight back, she said simply, and let me help you do it. How? First, I'm not changing our project records. The West Side Veterans Housing Project will continue to show you as the primary architect until someone provides compelling legal evidence otherwise. Natalie, I don't want to put your organization at risk. My organization exists to serve veterans who've been failed by systems that don't value their contributions. I'm not about to let a lying developer convince me to fail you the same way. She stood up, shouldering her portfolio. Second, I'm going to document everything. Every conversation, every email, every attempt to change historical records. If this goes to court, you'll have witnesses. And third, you should know that Darren called me this morning asking about future projects. Apparently, Caldwell Designs is very interested in bidding on our next veterans housing development. The audacity was stunning. He was already using my reputation and client relationships to secure new business under his rebranded company name. What did you tell him? That we only work with architects who understand our mission, she said with a slight smile. And that we'll be conducting very thorough background checks on any firm we consider. After Natalie left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, processing what I'd learned. Darren wasn't just stealing my past work, he was actively sabotaging my future ability to practice architecture. The forged signature issue was a professional death sentence if he could make it stick. But Natalie had also given me something else, proof that Darren's claims were fabrications. His own recorded voice admitting that he was changing historical records, his inability to answer technical questions about projects he claimed to have designed. I pulled out my phone and called Elias. We need to add criminal fraud to our complaint, I said, without preamble. Good morning to you too, Avery. What happened? I told him about Natalie's call, the recorded conversation, the signature issue, and Darren's email, creating a false narrative. Elias listened without interrupting, and I could hear him taking notes. This is bigger than intellectual property theft, he said finally. If he's systematically changing client records and filing false documentation with licensing boards, we're talking about multiple felonies. Can we prove it? With Natalie's cooperation, yes. The recorded conversation is gold. He's literally admitting to falsifying records. And if we can find other clients he's contacted with similar stories, how do we find them? We don't. We let the Georgia State Licensing Board find them. I felt something shift inside my chest, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. You want to file a complaint with the state? I want to file the most comprehensive licensing complaint in Georgia history, Elias said. Signature fraud, misrepresentation of credentials, falsification of project records, unauthorized practice. By the time we're done, Darren won't be able to design a doghouse legally. And my license? If we can prove you signed with his permission, and that he's now lying about giving that permission, you're protected. The violation would be his for allowing unauthorized signatures and then lying about it to regulatory authorities. I thought about 8 years of watching Darren build his reputation on my work. 8 years of believing that staying quiet and letting him take credit was the price of keeping our business successful. 8 years of thinking that my contributions were somehow less valuable because I preferred creating to self-promoting. Do it, I said. File the complaint, Avery. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Darren will know you're fighting back, and he'll escalate accordingly. I looked around the coffee shop, at people having normal conversations about normal problems. Job stress and weekend plans and where to go for lunch. Simple problems with simple solutions. My problem wasn't simple. My solution wouldn't be either. He escalated first, I said. He just didn't tell me he was doing it. All right then, Elias replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Let's build a case. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the copyright applications Elias had filed that morning. 43 original designs, ranging from my graduate thesis to last month's sustainable office complex proposal. Each one now legally protected as my intellectual property, regardless of what partnership agreements Darren might forge. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Darren called again. Wanted to know if I'd made the record changes yet. Told him I was still researching proper procedures. Thought you should know. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd managed since this ordeal began. Darren was getting impatient, which meant he was making mistakes, and I was finally ready to take advantage of every single one of them. Outside my window, the Atlanta skyline glittered in the twilight. Somewhere in that collection of glass and steel were buildings I'd designed, spaces I'd created, problems I'd solved. My work, regardless of whose name appeared on the awards. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of making sure everyone knew exactly who had created what. Tonight, I had plans to draw. The Georgia State Licensing Board occupied 3 floors of a nondescript office building on Peachtree Street, the kind of bureaucratic space designed to discourage casual visitors. I sat in the waiting area outside Kellen Rice's office, clutching a portfolio that contained what I hoped would be the beginning of the end of Darren's architectural career. Elias had described Kellen as unflinchingly ethical and terminally thorough, exactly the kind of investigator we needed. He'd been handling professional licensing complaints for 8 years, with a reputation for methodical investigations that either completely exonerated the accused or built cases so airtight that appeals were pointless. Miss Lynn, a man in his early 40s, appeared at the waiting room door. He was tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested he approached everything with the same systematic precision. I'm Kellen Rice. Thank you for coming in. His office was spartanly organized: 2 metal filing cabinets, a desk clear of everything except a computer and a single legal pad, and walls lined with Georgia building codes and professional standards manuals. The only personal touch was a framed photograph of what looked like urban planning blueprints. Before we begin, Kellen said, settling behind his desk, I want to be clear about what this meeting represents. You've filed a formal complaint against Darren Caldwell regarding professional licensing violations. That complaint is now part of an official investigation, which means everything we discuss is documented and potentially subject to legal proceedings. I understand. Good. My job is to determine whether there's sufficient evidence to warrant a full investigation, and if so, what disciplinary actions might be appropriate. He opened a fresh file folder and positioned his pen over the legal pad. Tell me what you believe Mr. Caldwell has done wrong. I had rehearsed this moment with Elias, but sitting across from a state investigator made the accusations feel more serious, more real. I believe my husband has systematically violated professional licensing standards by claiming credit for architectural work he didn't design, forging signatures on official documents, and misrepresenting his qualifications to clients. Kellen's pen moved steadily across the page. Let's start with the signature issue. That's typically the most straightforward to investigate. I pulled out the Westside Veterans Housing documentation Natalie had provided. This is the final design approval form for a project completed 18 months ago. The signature in the architect of record space appears to be Darren's, but it's actually mine. He examined the document carefully, comparing it to copies of both our signatures I'd provided. You signed your husband's name to an official city form? Yes, but with his explicit permission. He was out of town when the deadline arrived, and we needed the permits submitted immediately. This is common practice when architectural partners are managing multiple projects. Except that, according to our records, you weren't listed as a partner authorized to sign on behalf of Mr. Caldwell. Kellen pulled out another file. Apparently he'd done preliminary research before our meeting. The firm's official registration shows Darren Caldwell as the sole principal architect, with you listed as an associate. My stomach dropped. That's not correct. We were equal partners from the firm's inception. According to the partnership dissolution filed last month, the business was always structured as a sole proprietorship with you as an employee. I felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath me. Even here, in an official investigation, Darren's narrative was already embedded in the official record. Mr. Rise, I have the original partnership agreement showing equal ownership. I pulled out the documents Elias had prepared. I also have evidence that my signature on the dissolution paperwork was forged. Kellen examined the partnership agreement. Comparing it to the dissolution documents, his expression remained neutral, but I could see him making notes about signature inconsistencies. This is helpful, he said finally. If we can establish that the dissolution paperwork contains forged signatures, it calls into question the legitimacy of the current business structure. I handed him Natalie's digital recorder. There's something else. 3 days ago, my husband contacted a former client attempting to change historical project records. The client recorded the conversation. Kellen listened to the entire recording without interruption, his pen moving occasionally to capture specific quotes. When Darren's voice claimed I wasn't licensed to practice independently in Georgia, Kellen's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an interesting claim, he said, checking his computer. Your license has been current and in good standing for 6 years. No violations, no disciplinary actions, continuing education requirements up to date. Darren knows that. We work in the same office. So he's making false statements about your professional qualifications to clients. Kellen made another note. What's his motivation for doing that? I explained the divorce proceedings. Darren's claimed a sole ownership of our firm, and his systematic attempt to erase my professional contributions. Kellen listened without comment, but I could see him building a mental framework around the information. Let me ask you something, he said when I finished. If everything you're telling me is accurate, why did you wait until now to file a complaint? These issues seem to have been building for months. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since discovering the depth of Darren's deception. Because I trusted him, and because I believed that maintaining our marriage was more important than protecting my professional reputation. And now I understand that he never considered us equal partners in anything. The marriage, the business, the work in his mind. I was always just supporting staff. Kellen closed the file folder and leaned back in his chair. Miss Lynn, what outcome are you seeking from this investigation? I want the record corrected. I want clients to know who actually designed their buildings. And I want to ensure that Darren can't continue claiming credit for work he didn't do. Are you seeking to have his license revoked? I thought about that question. A week ago, I would have said no, that I just wanted fair treatment in our divorce. But after learning about his systematic fraud, his attempts to destroy my career, his willingness to lie to clients and regulatory authorities, I want whatever consequences are appropriate for his actions, I said. If that means license revocation, then yes. Kellen nodded slowly. I'm going to open a full investigation. It will take several weeks, possibly months, depending on what we find. I'll need to interview clients, examine project files, and potentially bring in forensic handwriting experts. What happens to Darren's ability to practice while the investigation is ongoing? If I find evidence of ongoing violations or risk to public safety, I can recommend immediate license suspension. Otherwise, he continues practicing under increased scrutiny. And if you find that my allegations are accurate, then we'll pursue appropriate disciplinary action, up to and including permanent license revocation. Kellen stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. Miss Lynn, I want you to understand something. Professional licensing complaints are serious business. If I find evidence supporting your allegations, Mr. Caldwell's architectural career in Georgia is likely over. And if you don't find evidence, then your complaint becomes part of your divorce proceedings, and you'll need to resolve these issues through civil litigation. He returned to his desk and pulled out a business card. My direct number is on there. If you discover additional evidence, Or if Mr. Caldwell contacts you about this investigation, I want to know immediately. He doesn't know I've filed a complaint yet. He will soon. I'll be contacting him this week to schedule an interview. His response to that request will tell us a lot about his intentions. That afternoon, I met Elias at a downtown restaurant to update him on the investigation. He listened to my account while making notes on his ever-present legal pad. Kellen, sounds thorough, he said. The fact that he's opening a full investigation based on preliminary evidence is encouraging. What happens next? We wait, and we prepare for Darren's reaction. Elias closed his notepad and looked at me seriously. Avery, once Kellen contacts him, this stops being a quiet divorce dispute and becomes a public professional crisis. Darren's going to panic, and panic people make bad decisions. What kind of bad decisions? He might try to destroy evidence. He might contact clients to influence their potential testimony. He might even try to file counter complaints against you. Can he do that? He can try, but we've documented everything carefully, and we have witnesses. The stronger concern is what he might do outside the professional licensing system. I thought about Darren's text messages, his increasing impatience with my failure to accept his settlement offer, his confidence that he could control the narrative of our divorce. He's going to escalate, I said. Probably. Which is why we need to be ready. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing client files, preparing for the comprehensive documentation Kellen would require. Every project contained dozens of emails, sketches, revision notes, and technical specifications that would prove my role as the primary designer. The Riverside Commons Sustainable Housing Project, 43 emails between me and the engineering consultants discussing solar panel integration, 12 different iterations of the lighting design, 3 presentations I'd given to city planners about environmental impact. The Veterans Housing Development, 67 pages of research notes on trauma-informed architecture, correspondence with disability advocacy groups, detailed specifications for adaptive features I'd designed to support veterans with mobility. Challenges. The Morrison Building renovation, my complete redesign of the structural system after discovering load-bearing problems the previous architect had missed, my solution that saved the client $100,000 and 6 months of construction delays. Project after project, the electronic paper trail told the same story. Darren managed client relationships and handled contracts, but I designed the buildings. I solved the technical problems. I created the innovations that won awards and earned recognition. My phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. Darren called again today, getting pushier about record changes. Told him I was consulting with our legal team. He didn't sound happy. I smiled and typed back, keep documenting everything. Change is coming. At 9:30, Darren arrived home from what he'd described as a client dinner. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop working on copyright documentation for another project. You're up late, he said, loosening his tie. Still playing with your little legal project? Just organizing some files, I replied neutrally. He opened the refrigerator and pulled out a beer, studying me with the calculating expression I'd learned to recognize. David called me today. Said you haven't responded to the settlement offer yet. I'm still reviewing my options. Avery, this is getting ridiculous. The offer is generous, and it's not going to improve with time. I looked up from my laptop, meeting his gaze directly. You know what I realized today? You've never actually asked me what I want from this divorce. I know what you want. You want to punish me for being successful. No, I said quietly. I want recognition for the work I've done. I want credit for the buildings I've designed. I want my professional identity back. Darren's expression shifted, becoming harder. Your professional identity exists because of me, because of the business I built, the clients I brought in, the reputation I established. Without me, you're just another architect with a portfolio. Is that what you really think? It's what I know. I closed my laptop and stood up. Well, I guess we'll find out, won't we? What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not accepting your settlement offer. It means I'm going to fight for what's mine. And it means you might be surprised by what I'm capable of when I stop trying to make you comfortable. For the first time since our mediation session, Darren looked uncertain. Avery, you're making a mistake. I've been trying to protect you from a messy legal battle, but if you want to fight, then we'll fight, I finished. But this time, I won't be doing it from the background. I left him standing in the kitchen and went upstairs to pack a bag. It was time to stop sleeping in the same house as someone who considered me disposable. It was time to start building my own foundation. My mother's house in Chambly still smelled like jasmine tea and star anise, the same combination that had welcomed me home from school every day of my childhood. I sat at her kitchen table with my overnight bag at my feet, trying to explain why her daughter's marriage had imploded without revealing the full scope of Darren's betrayal. "You look tired," Mei Lin said in Mandarin, setting a cup of tea in front of me. At 68, my mother remained elegantly precise in everything she did, from the way she arranged the tea service to the way she'd built a successful accounting practice serving Atlanta's Chinese-American business community. "I am tired, Ma," I replied in the same language. Speaking Mandarin with my mother always felt like returning to my authentic self, the person I'd been before. I learned to make myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. "Marriage problems are never simple," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "But you didn't come here just because you had a fight with Darren." I sipped the tea, gathering courage for a conversation I'd been avoiding for weeks. "Ma, do you remember when I first brought Darren home? What you thought of him?" May's expression grew thoughtful. "I thought he was charming, very confident, very sure of himself, and I worried that his confidence would overshadow your strength." The honesty surprised me. My mother had always been diplomatically polite about Darren, never voicing direct criticism of my marriage choices. "You never said anything. You were happy, or I thought you were happy." May studied my face carefully. "I was wrong to stay quiet. I should have asked you more questions about what you wanted, not what he wanted." I told her about the divorce proceedings, about Darren's claims to sole ownership of our firm, about the settlement offer that treated 8 years of my work as if it had been a hobby. May listened without interruption, her accountant's mind clearly processing the financial implications. "He's stealing from you," she said finally. "Not just money, your reputation, your future, your identity as an architect." "Yes, and you're fighting back?" "I'm trying to. I filed a complaint with the state licensing board. I hired Elias to protect my intellectual property. But Ma, I feel like I don't know how to fight for myself. I spent so many years believing that keeping peace was more important than claiming credit." May set down her teacup with a soft clink. "Avery, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago." She stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the small garden she'd maintained since buying the house 30 years ago. Every plant was precisely placed, carefully tended, thriving despite the Georgia heat. "When your father and I came to America, I made myself very small," she said. "I spoke quietly, avoided conflict, let other people take credit for my work, because I thought that was how immigrants survived. I built my accounting practice by being invisible, by making my clients feel comfortable with my quietness. But your practice is successful, now it is. But for the first 10 years, I let male colleagues take credit for my strategies, my insights, my innovations. I told myself I was being practical, that success was more important than recognition." She turned back to face me. "I taught you to be the same way, to work hard but stay humble, to let others shine while you built things in the background. I thought I was teaching you wisdom, but I was teaching you to disappear." The words hit me like a physical blow. How many times had my mother counseled patience when I'd complained about being overlooked? How many times had she suggested that my work would speak for itself, that recognition would come naturally to those who deserved it? "You were trying to protect me. I was teaching you my fears instead of my strength," May said firmly. "Your grandmother didn't immigrate to Taiwan from mainland China by staying quiet. She didn't build a business from nothing by letting men take credit for her ideas. She fought for everything she earned. And she taught me that a woman's intelligence is not a gift to be hidden, it's a weapon to be sharpened." She returned to the table and took my hands in hers. Her fingers were still strong from decades of working with numbers, calculating solutions to other people's financial problems. "I forgot my grandmother's lessons when I came to America. I let fear make me small. But you have both my education and your grandmother's fire. You don't have to choose between being smart and being safe." "Ma, what if I can't win? What if Darren has too many advantages?" "Then you lose fighting, instead of lose surrendering." "But Avery, you won't lose. You know why? Why? Because you build things that last. Darren only knows how to take credit for other people's work. When he has to defend something he didn't create, he'll crumble." That afternoon, my phone rang while May and I were working in her garden. Elias's name appeared on the screen, and his voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since law school. Avery, we hit gold. Pure, unfiltered, prosecution quality gold. What did you find? Remember how I said I'd request contract documents from all your major clients over the past 2 years? Yes. 3 different clients have contracts with signatures that don't match the signature database we built from your copyright applications. But they don't match Darren's signatures either. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? I mean, someone has been forging both your signatures on legal documents, and not very well. May looked up from the tomato plants she was pruning, sensing the importance of the conversation. Can you prove it's Darren doing the forging? Better than that. I can prove when he did it. Elias's voice was rich with satisfaction. The Morrison building renovation contract was signed 3 months ago while you were both in town. But the signature on that contract doesn't match either of your natural signatures. It's a hybrid, like someone trying to copy your signature style, but using Darren's muscle memory. That's still circumstantial evidence. Not when combined with this. The contract modifications for the Riverside Commons project show 2 different versions of your signature on documents dated 1 day apart. One is clearly yours, on a preliminary agreement. The other is clearly forged, on the final contract that increased the project fee by $40,000. I sank into one of May's garden chairs, processing the implications. He's been forging my signature to authorize contract modifications I never agreed to, for at least 6 months, maybe longer. I've found 8 different instances where your signature appears on documents increasing project fees, extending timelines, or changing payment structures. Documents you probably never saw. Elias, that's felony fraud, multiple counts. And we can prove it with forensic handwriting analysis. May set down her pruning shears and moved closer, her expression sharpening with the focus I remembered from my childhood when she'd helped me with difficult math problems. What does this mean for the divorce proceedings? I asked. It means Darren has been systematically defrauding clients using your forged signature. It means he's been collecting money for work you didn't authorize and keeping you in the dark about financial arrangements made in your name. The full scope of Darren's deception was becoming clear. He hadn't just been taking credit for my architectural work, he'd been using my professional reputation to commit financial fraud. How much money are we talking about? Preliminary estimate? Somewhere around $200,000 in unauthorized fees over the past 18 months. I felt May's hand on my shoulder, steadying me as the numbers sank in. $200,000. Enough to buy a house, start a business, establish an independent practice. Money that clients had paid for my work but which had disappeared into accounts I'd never seen. Elias, I need you to get this information to Kellen immediately. Already done. I sent everything to him an hour ago. He's requesting an emergency meeting with you tomorrow morning. Emergency meeting? Avery, this changes everything. We're not just talking about professional licensing violations anymore. We're talking about criminal fraud that could result in felony charges. After I hung up, May and I sat in her garden as the late afternoon light filtered through the oak trees. The quiet suburban neighborhood seemed surreal given the magnitude of what I'd just learned. $200,000, May said quietly. In China, we have a saying, the fish rots from the head. Darren's corruption has been poisoning everything he touches. Ma, I'm scared. This is so much bigger than I thought. Good, you should be scared. Fear will keep you careful. She turned to face me fully. But don't let fear keep you quiet. Your grandmother used to say that silence in the face of injustice is just another form of collaboration. That evening, May made dinner while I sat at her kitchen table reviewing every contract, every email, every financial document I could access remotely. The pattern of deception was methodical, professional, and absolutely damning. Darren had been operating essentially 2 businesses: the legitimate architectural firm where I did the creative work, and a shadow operation where he manipulated contracts and collected unauthorized fees using my forged signature. You know what this means, May said, setting a plate of her famous dumplings in front of me. That my husband is a criminal? That your husband underestimated you so completely that he kept evidence of his crimes in files you could access. She was right. Darren's arrogance had been his downfall. He'd been so confident in my passivity, so certain that I would never challenge his authority or investigate our business practices, that he'd never bothered to hide his fraud. Ma, Can I ask you something? Of course. When you finally started taking credit for your own work, when you stopped being invisible, how did it feel? May smiled, the expression transforming her face. Like coming home to myself, like remembering who I was before I learned to be afraid. I want to feel that way. Then stop asking permission to be brilliant. Stop making yourself small so that small men can feel large. She reached across the table and took my hand. Your grandmother built a business empire in Taiwan by never apologizing for her intelligence. I built a successful practice here by eventually learning to do the same. You're going to build something even bigger because you have advantages we never had. What advantages? You have documentation. You have allies. You have a legal system that, for all its flaws, still recognizes intellectual property and professional ethics. May's grip tightened. And you have something Darren will never understand. What's that? You have the patience to build a perfect case before you strike. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I thought about my grandmother, a woman I'd never met but whose strength apparently ran in my veins. A woman who'd built businesses and raised children and refused to let anyone diminish her contributions to the world. I thought about my mother, who'd spent 30 years building a successful practice while teaching me that quiet competence was the highest virtue. And I thought about myself, the architect who'd spent 8 years designing buildings that improved people's lives while allowing someone else to claim credit for the innovations that made those improvements possible. Tomorrow, I would meet with Kellen and present evidence that could destroy Darren's career permanently. Tomorrow, I would stop being the silent partner in my own life. Tonight, I would plan exactly how to build my own empire. The emergency meeting with Kellen lasted 3 hours and ended with him requesting immediate access to every contract, every bank record, and every client communication from the past 2 years. As I walked out of the licensing board office, my phone buzzed with a text from Elias. Cease and desist orders filed this morning. Darren can no longer use your designs without written permission. I sat in my car in the parking garage, reading the legal documents Elias had sent. 43 separate cease and desist notices, each one identifying specific architectural designs that were my intellectual property and could no longer be used by Caldwell Designs without my explicit authorization. It was a surgical strike, designed to immediately cripple Darren's ability to operate. Every project he was currently marketing, every proposal he was developing, every contract he was negotiating, all of it suddenly required my permission to proceed. My phone rang before I could fully process the implications. Did you see the news? Natalie's voice was tight with controlled anger. What news? Check Channel 11's website. Darren held a press conference an hour ago. I pulled up the Atlanta news station's homepage on my phone. The headline made my stomach drop. Local architect wins prestigious Sustainable Design Award. Below it was a photo of Darren standing in front of the Riverside Commons building, holding a plaque from the Georgia Environmental Design Council. The article was brief but devastating. Darren Caldwell of Caldwell Designs was honored today for his innovative sustainable housing project that has become a model for environmentally conscious urban development. This recognition validates our commitment to building a more sustainable Atlanta, Caldwell said. The award comes as his firm expands operations following a recent business restructuring. As if erasing me from our partnership was just another strategic decision. Avery, are you there? I'm here. When did this award ceremony happen? This morning. I called the Environmental Design Council to ask about it. Natalie's voice carried the precision of someone who'd spent years coordinating military logistics. They said Caldwell Designs submitted the application 3 months ago. The application materials identified Darren as the sole architect for the Riverside project. 3 months ago, while we were still married, still supposedly partners, still sharing the same office and the same bed. There's more, Natalie continued. The award comes with a $25,000 grant for future sustainable design projects. Grant money that's being awarded based on your work. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the car seat. Darren wasn't just stealing credit for past work, he was monetizing my innovations to fund his future business. Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Go ahead. Would you be willing to speak to a journalist about this? On the record, there was a pause. What kind of journalist? Investigative reporter. Someone who could expose what Darren's been doing. Avery, my organization depends on maintaining good relationships with the local development community. If I go public with accusations against a prominent architect, I understand. I won't ask you to jeopardize your work with veterans. I didn't say no, Natalie interrupted. I said I need to be careful. If you can find a reporter who's thorough, who's willing to verify facts instead of just printing gossip, I'll tell them everything I know. That afternoon, I researched Atlanta's investigative journalism community. Most of the reporters I found specialized in political corruption or corporate malfeasance, but one name kept appearing in articles about professional misconduct and regulatory failures. Camilla Shore. Shore wrote for Atlanta Business Chronicle and had a reputation for deep dive investigations that often resulted in disciplinary actions or criminal charges. Her most recent series had exposed bid rigging in the city's construction contracts, leading to 3 indictments and a complete overhaul of the procurement process. I found her email address and spent an hour crafting a message that was professional but compelling. Miss Shore, I'm writing to alert you to a potential story involving professional misconduct in Atlanta's architecture community. I have documented evidence of licensing violations, signature fraud, and misrepresentation of design credits that may warrant investigation. I'm available to discuss this matter at your convenience. Avery Lynn. Her response came back within 2 hours. Miss Lynn, I'm intrigued. Can you meet tomorrow at p.m.? Camilla Shore. The next day, I found myself in a coffee shop in Little 5 Points, waiting for a woman I'd never met but who might have the power to reshape the public narrative around my marriage and career. I'd chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to the entrance, a habit I'd developed during weeks of increasingly paranoid thinking about Darren's next moves. Camilla Shore was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of sharp energy that suggested she approached everything as a potential story. She arrived precisely on time, carrying a messenger bag that looked like it contained enough recording equipment to document a congressional hearing. Miss Lynn? She extended her hand with a firm grip. Thank you for reaching out. I've been hearing interesting rumors about Caldwell Designs. What kind of rumors? The kind that suggest your recent divorce might involve more than just marital problems. She settled into the chair across from me and pulled out a digital recorder. Do you mind if I record our conversation? Actually, I do mind. For now. Camilla's eyebrows rose slightly, but she put the recorder away. Fair enough. Why don't you tell me what you think I should know? I had rehearsed this conversation, but sitting across from an investigative reporter made everything feel more serious, more permanent. Once I spoke to Camilla, there would be no taking back the accusations, no returning to the quiet divorce proceedings Darren had planned. My husband has been systematically taking credit for architectural work I designed, I began. He's forged my signature on legal documents, misrepresented my qualifications to clients, and used my professional reputation to commit what I believe is fraud. Camilla pulled out a notebook and began writing. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? I walked her through the signature analysis, the recorded conversation with Natalie, the contract modifications showing unauthorized FEs, and the licensing board investigation. Camilla asked pointed questions about documentation, timelines, and potential motivations. Why are you coming to me instead of letting the licensing board handle this? She asked. Because Darren is actively rewriting history. Yesterday he accepted an award for sustainable design work that was entirely my creation. He's using my innovations to win grants and contracts while publicly erasing my contributions. And you want me to write about it? I want you to investigate it. If the facts support my claims, then yes, I want the public to know what happened. Camilla studied me for a long moment. Miss Lynn, I've covered a lot of professional misconduct cases. Usually, the victims want anonymity, not publicity. Why are you different? It was a question I'd been asking myself since deciding to contact her. Because hiding hasn't protected me. For 8 years, I stayed quiet while someone else took credit for my work. I thought that keeping peace was more important than claiming recognition. But silence just made it easier for him to erase me completely. So this is about getting your name back? This is about making sure other women don't go through what I've gone through. About making sure the next time someone tries to steal credit for work they didn't do, there are consequences. Camilla made a note, then looked up with increased interest. Can you prove that your husband knew he was taking credit for your work? Intent matters in these kinds of stories. I pulled out my phone and played the recording Natalie had made. Camilla listened to the entire conversation without interruption, her expression growing more focused as Darren's voice explained how he was correcting administrative errors and managing my personal issues. "That's damning," she said when the recording ended. "He's not just taking credit, he's actively lying to clients about your role and qualifications. There's more." I showed her the press release about yesterday's award ceremony. "This is him accepting recognition for a project I designed from start to finish." Camilla examined the article, making notes about dates and details. "How can you prove you designed it?" "I have every email, every sketch, every revision note, every presentation slide. 18 months of documentation showing my role as the primary architect." "And does Mr. Caldwell have similar documentation?" "He has photographs of himself at meetings I arranged, presentations he gave using slides I created, and awards ceremonies where he accepted recognition for my work." Camilla closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. "Miss Lynn, if everything you're telling me is accurate, this is a significant story. But I need to verify facts independently. I'll need to speak with clients, examine documents, and give your husband an opportunity to respond to your allegations." "I understand. I also need to warn you about something. Once I start investigating, this becomes public. Your marriage troubles, your professional disputes, your financial arrangements, all of it becomes fair game for public discussion." I thought about my mother's words. Silence in the face of injustice is just another form of collaboration. I'm prepared for that. "And if my investigation concludes that your allegations are unfounded, then I'll accept the consequences of making false accusations." Camilla pulled out her business card and wrote her cell phone number on the back. "I'll need copies of all the documentation you mentioned. Email addresses for clients who can verify your role in projects. Contact information for anyone who witnessed your husband's misconduct." "How long will your investigation take?" "Depends on what I find. If the evidence is as clear as you suggest, I could have a preliminary article ready within a week." That evening, I sat in my mother's guest room organizing digital files for Camilla's investigation. Every project folder told the same story, months of my work culminating in Darren's public presentations and award acceptances. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia Vaughn, Mr. Caldwell's attorney. Please contact our office immediately regarding urgent legal matters." I showed the message to May, who was bringing me tea and homemade cookies. "He knows," she said simply. "Knows what?" "That you're not the same woman who sat quietly through that mediation session. That you're fighting back, and fighting effectively." My phone rang with Elias's number. "Avery, we have a problem." Darren's attorney filed an emergency motion, requesting a restraining order against you. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming you're harassing clients, interfering with business operations, and making false accusations that could damage his professional reputation." I felt a familiar chill of anxiety, followed immediately by something else, anger. "Can they get a restraining order?" "They can try. We'll have a hearing on Friday." "But Avery, this means Darren knows about the cease and desist orders, probably knows about the licensing board investigation, and definitely knows you're not backing down." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Let him know exactly what he's dealing with." After I hung up, May sat on the edge of the bed, studying my face. "You're different," she said, "stronger, more like your grandmother." "How so?" "She used to say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time was now." May smiled. "You're finally planting your forest." I looked at the stacks of documentation spread across the desk, evidence of 8 years of architectural innovation, client relationships, and professional accomplishments that Darren was trying to claim as his own. Tomorrow, Camilla would begin her investigation. Friday, I would face Darren in court for the first time since this war began. Within weeks, the licensing board would complete their review and potentially end his career permanently. But tonight, I had work to do. Tonight, I was finally building something that belonged entirely to me, a case so comprehensive, so meticulously documented, so unquestionably accurate that no amount of charm or manipulation could undermine it. Darren had taught me many things. Over 8 years of marriage, but the most valuable lesson was one he'd never intended to teach: how to recognize the difference between building something worthwhile and simply taking credit for someone else's foundation. I was done building on his terms. It was time to construct my own blueprint for justice. The call from Cullen came at 6:45 in the morning, while I was drinking coffee in May's kitchen and reading Camilla's preliminary questions for Her investigation. Miss Lynn, I'm calling to inform you that as of 8 a.m. today, Darren Caldwell's architectural license will be suspended pending the outcome of our investigation. I set down my coffee cup with trembling hands. Suspended? The evidence you and Mr. Romero provided was sufficient to warrant immediate action. Signature fraud, misrepresentation of credentials, unauthorized contract modifications. These violations pose an immediate risk to public safety and professional integrity. May looked up from her morning paper, reading the shock on my face. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means Mr. Caldwell cannot sign architectural plans, cannot represent himself as a licensed architect, and cannot legally practice architecture in Georgia until our investigation concludes. And his existing projects? Any project requiring a licensed architect's oversight will need to find alternative representation. Any contracts pending his signature are void until he regains his license. I thought about the dozens of projects in various stages of development, the clients who would wake up this morning to discover their architect could no longer legally practice, the contracts that would suddenly become worthless pieces of paper. Mr. Rise, how long will the investigation take? Given the scope of violations, probably 8 to 12 weeks, possibly longer if we uncover additional evidence. After I hung up, May and I sat in the quiet of her kitchen, processing what had just happened. Somewhere across Atlanta, Darren was about to discover that his professional life had been suspended with a single phone call. How do you feel? May asked. I examined my emotions carefully, surprised by what I found. Relieved and terrified. Terrified of what? Of what he'll do when he finds out. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Just got a call from Westside Property Management. They're looking for a new architect for the Phase 2 Veterans Housing Project. Apparently, their current architect is having licensing issues. Are you available? I stared at the message, understanding its implications. The West Side project had been one of Caldwell and Lynn's most prestigious contracts, a 3-phase development that would have provided steady income for the next 2 years. If Natalie was redirecting the contract to me personally, I typed back, I'm very interested. Can we meet this afternoon? Her response was immediate. How about lunch? I have some other people I'd like you to meet. At noon, I drove to a restaurant in Virginia Highland, my stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I found Natalie sitting at a corner table with 2 people I didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a younger man wearing a contractor's logo on his polo shirt. Avery, I'd like you to meet Catherine Reynolds and Marcus Webb, Natalie said as I joined them. Catherine develops sustainable housing projects throughout the Southeast. Marcus runs the construction company that built the original West Side development. Catherine extended her hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to commanding construction sites. Miss Lynn, I've been following your work for 2 years. The Riverside Commons project was exactly the kind of innovation our industry needs. Thank you. But I should clarify, I'm currently involved in divorce proceedings that complicate my professional status. We know, Marcus said. We also know that Darren Caldwell's license was suspended this morning. I looked at Natalie, who shrugged apologetically. Word travels fast in our community. When a prominent architect loses his license, everyone hears about it within hours. Catherine leaned forward. Avery, we're not interested in Caldwell Designs. We're interested in working with you personally. Natalie has shown us documentation proving you were the primary architect on the projects we admire. I don't currently have an independent practice that can be arranged, Catherine interrupted. Marcus and I have been discussing the possibility of establishing a formal partnership with an architect who shares our commitment to sustainable, community-focused development. Marcus nodded. We've worked with enough architects to recognize the difference between someone who understands design and someone who just knows how to present other people's ideas. I felt something shifting in my chest. Possibility, hope, the first glimpse of a future that didn't depend on Darren's approval or recognition. What kind of partnership are you envisioning? Equity partnership, Catherine said. We provide the business development and project management expertise. You provide the architectural innovation and design leadership. Equal partnership, shared profits, your name on everything you create. Lynn Reynolds and Associates, Marcus added with a grin. Has a nice ring to it. I need to be transparent about something, I said. My divorce proceedings are complicated. There may be legal challenges to my ability to take on new clients. Natalie briefed us on the situation, Catherine replied. We're prepared to work through any legal complications. What we can't afford to do is miss the opportunity to work with the architect who designed the most innovative sustainable housing project in Georgia. That afternoon, I drove back to Buckhead to collect more of my belongings from the house I'd shared with Darren. His BMW wasn't in the driveway, which meant he was either at the office dealing with the licensing crisis or somewhere else trying to manage the disaster his professional life had become. I used my key to enter through the front door, moving quickly through rooms that felt like artifacts from someone else's life. In my home office, I gathered the last of my personal files, my drafting instruments, and the few photographs that documented my individual achievements before marriage. I was packing my laptop when I heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. "Avery," Darren's voice carried from the foyer, tight with rage. "I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway." I closed my laptop bag and walked to the top of the stairs. Darren stood in the entryway below, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. He looked like a man whose carefully constructed world had collapsed in a single morning. "Hello, Darren. What the fuck did you do?" "I filed a complaint with the licensing board. I thought you knew that. You destroyed my career." His voice was raw, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "Do you understand what you've done? 12 years of building this business, and you've destroyed it in a week." I descended the stairs slowly, maintaining distance between us, but no longer afraid of his anger. "I didn't destroy anything, Darren. I simply told the truth." "About who? Designed what?" "The truth?" He laughed bitterly. "The truth is that you'd be nobody without me. The truth is that your precious designs would be rotting in some junior architect's portfolio if I hadn't turned them into a successful business." "You're right about one thing," I said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "My designs would have remained in portfolios, because I would have kept them rather than letting someone else take credit for them." "This is insane, Avery. You're destroying both our lives over ego." "No, Darren. You destroyed both our lives over ego. I'm just making sure everyone knows whose ego it was." His expression shifted, becoming calculating in a way that made me step back toward the door. "You think you've won something here?" he said quietly. "You think suspending my license makes you the victim in this story? I think having your license suspended makes you unemployable as an architect." "We'll see about that." His smile was sharp and cold. "Patricia's filing an emergency appeal. We'll have my license reinstated within a month." "Based on what grounds?" "Based on the fact that you're a vindictive ex-wife making false accusations to damage my reputation. Based on the fact that you've been harassing my clients and interfering with my business relationships." I felt the familiar chill of manipulation, the way Darren could make his victims seem like villains with a few carefully chosen words. "Darren, you forged my signature on legal documents. You lied to clients about my qualifications. You stole credit for work I designed. Those aren't false accusations, they're documented facts." "Documentation can be questioned. Signatures can be disputed. Client testimony can be discredited." His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd spent years manipulating narratives to his advantage. "But you know what can't be disputed? 8 years of marriage where you were completely dependent on me for your professional success." "I was never dependent on you, prove it," he interrupted. "Go ahead and start your own practice. See how many clients want to work with the architect who destroyed her husband's career over a divorce settlement." I looked at him standing in the foyer of the house I'd designed, surrounded by awards for work I'd created, threatening me with professional isolation as punishment for claiming my own accomplishments. "Actually, Darren, I already have my first client." His expression faltered slightly. "What?" "Westside Property Management offered me the phase 2 veterans housing contract this morning. Apparently, they need a new architect due to licensing issues with their previous firm." "That's my contract." That was Caldwell and Lynn's contract. Since there's no more Caldwell and Lynn, and since Caldwell Designs can't legally practice architecture in Georgia, the contract reverted to me as the architect of record for Phase 1. Darren's face flushed with anger. "You can't practice independently. You don't have professional liability insurance. You don't have a business license. You don't have the infrastructure to manage major projects. All of those things can be arranged. What can't be arranged is a professional reputation based on stolen work and forged signatures." I picked up my laptop bag and walked toward the door. "I'll be back for the rest of my things this weekend. Please don't be here when I come, Avery." His voice stopped me at the door. "This doesn't end here. If you think ruining my career protects you from the consequences of this divorce, you're wrong. I turned back to face him one last time. You're right, Darren. This doesn't end here. This ends when every client knows who really designed their buildings. This ends when every award is attributed to the person who actually earned it. This ends when the architectural community understands that taking credit for other people's work has consequences. And if I decide to fight back, then you'll be fighting someone who spent 8 years learning exactly how you operate. Someone who documented every project, every client relationship, every innovation you claimed as your own. I opened the door and stepped outside. Good luck with that. That evening, I sat in May's living room reviewing partnership agreements Catherine had sent over. The terms were generous, the equity split was fair, and for the first time in years, I would be working under my own name. My phone buzzed with a message from Camilla. First article publishes tomorrow morning. Thought you should know. I felt a rush of anticipation and terror. Tomorrow, Atlanta's business community would wake up to read about the licensing suspension, the investigation, and the allegations of professional misconduct that had brought down one of the city's most prominent architects. Tomorrow, the quiet divorce dispute that Darren had planned would become a very public reckoning. May looked up from her book. Everything all right? Everything's about to change, I replied. Again, for better or worse. I thought about Catherine's partnership offer, about the veterans housing project that was now mine to design, about the possibility of building a practice based on my own work rather than someone else's recognition. For better, I said. Definitely for better. Outside, Atlanta's skyline glittered in the darkness, full of buildings designed by architects whose names appeared on awards and contracts and professional licenses. Tomorrow, one more architect would join their ranks not by taking credit for borrowed work, but by finally claiming credit for her own. The article appeared online at 6 a.m. and was trending on Atlanta Business Chronicle's social media by 8. I read it 3 times over breakfast at May's kitchen table, watching my private war become public knowledge, with each carefully documented paragraph. The woman behind the designs. License suspension exposes credit theft in prominent architecture. Firm by Camilla Shore. The headline alone made my hands shake as I held the tablet. Below it was a photo of the Riverside Commons building, my building, with a caption identifying it as one of several projects at the center of the licensing investigation. Camilla had been thorough. The article detailed the signature fraud, the contract modifications, the systematic erasure of my contributions, and the licensing board's suspension of Darren's credentials. But what made it devastating was the way she'd structured the narrative, not as he said she said divorce drama, but as a case study in professional misconduct. Forensic analysis of contract documents reveals a pattern of signature inconsistencies spanning 18 months, Camilla had written. Multiple clients interviewed for this article confirmed that they were unaware of changes to project credits and fee structures that appeared in their final contracts. She'd interviewed Natalie, Catherine, and Marcus. She'd spoken with city planning officials who remembered me presenting design concepts that Darren later claimed as his own. She'd even tracked down the forensic handwriting expert who'd analyzed the forged signatures for the licensing board. Most damaging of all, she'd included a sidebar comparing Darren's public statements about his design process with documentary evidence showing my role as the primary architect. The contradiction was stark and undeniable. My phone started ringing at 7:30. Miss Lin, this is Sarah Chen from Channel 5 News. We'd like to interview you about the Business Chronicle article. I declined politely, then declined for more interview requests over the next hour. Local radio stations, architecture trade publications, even a producer from a national morning show. The story was spreading beyond Atlanta's business community into the broader conversation about professional ethics and gender discrimination. At 9:15, Elias called with news that made the media attention feel secondary. Darren's attorney called this morning, he said. They want to settle. Settle what? Everything. The divorce, the intellectual property disputes, the fraud allegations. Patricia offered you 60% of all firm assets, full rights to your designs, and a public acknowledgement of your role in all past projects. I sat down slowly in May's living room chair. 60%? Plus they're dropping the restraining order request and agreeing not to contest any licensing board findings. What's the catch? You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. No more interviews. No more public statements. No cooperation with ongoing investigations. Complete silence about everything that happened during your marriage and partnership. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Even now, even with his license suspended and his reputation crumbling, Darren was trying to control the narrative by buying my silence. What did you tell them? That I'd present the offer to my client, but that I suspected you'd have strong feelings about the non-disclosure clause. You suspected correctly. Avery, 60% of the firm's assets is probably close to $2 million. That's enough to establish your own practice without partners, without debt, without anyone else's approval. And all I have to do is let Darren disappear into obscurity instead of facing the full consequences of what he did. Essentially, yes. I thought about my mother's words about silence being another form of collaboration. About my grandmother building a business empire by refusing to let anyone diminish her contributions. About 8 years of watching Darren accept credit for innovations he couldn't even explain to clients. Elias, has anyone else filed licensing complaints against Darren? Not that I know of. Why? Because if I take this settlement and sign the NDA, I become the only person with documented evidence of his misconduct. And I become legally prohibited from sharing that evidence with future victims. That's correct. So he gets to disappear for a few years, rebuild his practice in another state, and continue taking credit for other people's work. Possibly. No, I said firmly. Absolutely not. Avery, I have to advise you that this is an extremely generous offer. If you reject it and the licensing board concludes their investigation without finding sufficient evidence for permanent revocation, you could end up with significantly less in the final divorce settlement. Then we'd better make sure the licensing board has all the evidence they need. That afternoon, the court-ordered mediation session felt like a formality. Darren sat across from me in the same conference room where this had all started, but everything about him had changed. His usual confidence was replaced by barely controlled desperation, his charming smile by the tight-lipped expression of someone trying not to reveal panic. Patricia Vaughn laid out the settlement offer with professional precision, emphasizing the financial benefits and the opportunity to move forward without prolonged litigation. This represents a significant acknowledgement of Mrs. Caldwell's contributions to the firm, she said. My client is prepared to be very generous in recognition of her creative work. David Chen reviewed the terms carefully before looking at me. Avery, this is substantially more than we could expect from a contested divorce proceeding. The non-disclosure agreement is restrictive, but the financial compensation is exceptional. I looked at Darren, studying his face for the first time in weeks. He met my gaze with what I recognized as his negotiation expression, calm, confident, designed to suggest he was offering me a favor rather than desperately trying to buy his way out of professional destruction. I'd like to ask my husband a question, I said. Patricia frowned. Mrs. Caldwell, this isn't typically how mediation proceeds. It's fine, Darren interrupted. What's your question, Avery? Do you believe you designed the Riverside Commons project? His eyes narrowed slightly. I believe I was the architect of record for that project, yes. That's not what I asked. Do you believe you personally created the sustainable design systems, the lighting innovations, the accessibility features that won awards? I believe I managed the project from conception to completion. Do you believe you drew those plans? Do you believe you calculated the solar panel configurations? Do you believe you researched trauma-informed design principles for the Veterans Housing Project? Darren's jaw tightened. I believe I was responsible for the overall vision and execution of those projects. But you didn't design them. Avery, you didn't design them, I repeated. You've never designed anything. You've spent 8 years taking credit for my work, and now you want to pay me to keep quiet about it. The room fell silent. Patricia looked uncomfortable, David looked concerned, and Darren looked like he was calculating whether to lose his temper or maintain his composure. Is that a rejection of our settlement offer? Patricia asked finally. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the digital recorder Natalie had given me weeks ago. Before I answer that, I think everyone should hear something. I pressed play, and Darren's voice filled the conference room. She's not actually licensed to practice independently in Georgia. Technically, I'm responsible for all design decisions and approvals. Between you and me, Avery's going through some personal issues right now. Divorce proceedings can be difficult. She might not be thinking clearly about business matters. Darren's face went white as his own voice continued explaining how he was correcting administrative errors and managing my supposed mental instability. That recording was made 3 weeks ago, I said when it ended. Darren was lying too. A client about my professional qualifications while simultaneously trying to steal credit for work I'd designed for that same client. Mrs. Caldwell, Patricia said carefully, you should know that recording someone without their consent may not be admissible in criminal proceedings, possibly. But we're not in criminal court. We're in mediation. And this recording demonstrates my husband's pattern of misrepresenting my role in our business. I looked directly at Darren. You asked me once what I wanted from this divorce. I want you to answer one question honestly, in front of witnesses, with your attorney present. Avery, did you design any of the projects that won awards for Caldwell and Lynn Designs? The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Darren stared at the table, his hands clenched in his lap, while everyone waited for an answer that we all knew he couldn't give. I managed those projects, he said finally. That's not what I asked. I supervised the design process. Did you personally create any original architectural innovations? Did you draw any plans? Did you solve any engineering problems? Did you develop any of the sustainable systems that made our projects award-winning? Another long silence. No, he said quietly, I didn't. The admission hung in the air like a guilty verdict. Patricia looked stunned, David looked satisfied, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete vindication. Thank you for being honest, I said. Now I'll be honest with you. I'm rejecting your settlement offer. Avery, I'm rejecting it because taking your money and signing your non-disclosure agreement would make me complicit in covering up fraud. It would mean that the next architect you work with, the next woman whose work you steal, would have no way to prove a pattern of misconduct. I stood up and gathered my papers. I'd rather have my name on one building I actually designed than have my signature on a contract that helps you hide what you've done. Mrs. Caldwell, Patricia said urgently, this offer may not be available if you leave this room. Then I guess I'll have to live with the consequences of choosing integrity over money. I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. Darren, you spent 8 years telling me I was just technical support for your vision. You were wrong about that. But you were right about one thing: I am different now. I'm different because I finally understand that my work has value regardless of whether you acknowledge it. And if the licensing board doesn't revoke my license permanently, if I rebuild my practice somewhere else, then you'll do it without any of my designs, without any of my innovations, and without any documentation suggesting I was ever anything other than your equal partner. I smiled. Good luck building a reputation based entirely on your own work. That evening, Camilla called while I was having dinner with May. The Chronicle's website crashed twice today from traffic on your article, she said. We've never had a business story get this kind of response. What kind of response? Marriage and family lawyers are calling it required reading for anyone dealing with professional partnerships and divorce. Architecture firms are reviewing their intellectual property policies. The Georgia chapter of the AIA issued a statement about the importance of accurate design credits. And Darren? His office phone has been disconnected. The Caldwell Designs website is down. 2 more clients have contacted me saying they want to review their project documentation. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Watching someone's career implode, even someone who'd stolen from me for years, wasn't as purely satisfying as I'd expected. Camilla, I want to be clear about something. This was never about destroying Darren's career. What was it about? Making sure the next woman who designs something innovative gets credit for creating it. After I hung up, May and I sat in comfortable silence, processing the magnitude of what had happened. In less than a month, I'd gone from accepting a settlement offer that treated me as disposable to rejecting a multi-million-dollar deal that would have made me complicit in covering up fraud. Do you regret it? May asked. Walking away from that much money? I thought about Catherine's partnership offer, about the veterans housing project that would bear my name, about the possibility of building a practice based entirely on my own work. I regret not doing it 8 years ago, I said. But I don't regret doing it now. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Lynn, this is Rachel Martinez, an architect in Miami. I read the Chronicle article. I think I may have worked with your ex-husband before my licensing board suspended him here 2 years ago. Could we talk? I stared at the message, understanding its implications. Darren's pattern of misconduct hadn't started with me, and it wouldn't have ended with me. But it was ending now. 6 weeks after Camilla's first article, I stood in the empty office space that would become Lynn, Reynolds and Associates, watching contractors install the sign I'd designed myself. The letters were clean, modern, sustainable, carved from reclaimed wood with LED backlighting powered by rooftop solar panels. Every element had been chosen to reflect the values I wanted my practice to embody. "It looks perfect," Catherine said, joining me by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Atlanta. "Professional but approachable, innovative but grounded." "It feels surreal," I admitted. 3 months ago, I thought my architectural career was over. Now I'm standing in my own office, preparing to break ground on the largest veterans housing project in Georgia. "Not your own office," Catherine corrected with a smile. "Our office. Equal partners, remember?" The partnership had exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Catherine brought 15 years of development experience and a network of contacts throughout the Southeast. Marcus handled project management and construction coordination with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made complex builds run smoothly. Together, we'd created something I'd never had with Darren, a truly collaborative practice where every partner's contributions were recognized and valued. My phone buzzed with a text from May. "Saw the Chronicle business section. The photo of you in front of the office looks exactly like your grandmother. She would be proud." The Chronicle had published a follow-up feature about my new practice, part of their ongoing coverage of the Caldwell licensing investigation. Camilla had become something close to a friend over the past month, checking in regularly about the progress of both the investigation and my professional rebuilding. "Any word from Cullen about the final ruling?" Catherine asked. "Elias thinks we'll hear something next week. The licensing board has been thorough. They've interviewed 17 clients, examined hundreds of documents, and brought in 3 different handwriting experts." "And Darren?" Radio silence since the settlement offer was rejected. "His attorney filed an appeal of the license suspension, but it was denied last week." I walked to the conference table where architectural plans were spread across the polished surface designs for the West Side Phase 2 project, drawings for a sustainable office complex in Midtown, preliminary sketches for an affordable housing development in East Atlanta. Each project bore my signature, my license number, my vision for how buildings could improve people's lives. "Avery," Marcus called from across the office, where he was reviewing construction timelines with our project coordinator. "The West Side groundbreaking ceremony is confirmed for next Friday. Channel 11 wants to interview you about the sustainable design features." I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied public attention, but it was different now. Excitement rather than dread, anticipation rather than fear of exposure. "Tell them yes," I said. "It's time people understood what trauma-informed architecture actually looks like." That afternoon, I drove to the house in Buckhead to collect the last of my personal belongings. The divorce papers had been finalized the previous week, with terms that reflected my improved negotiating position. I kept my car, my professional library, and most importantly, all rights to intellectual property I'd created before, during, and after our marriage. The house felt like a museum of someone else's life. Darren had removed all traces of my presence, my books, my awards, even the photographs of projects I'd designed. The walls displayed only his accolades now, a shrine to accomplishments that the licensing board had systematically discredited. I found him in his study, sitting behind the desk where he'd once dismissed my contributions as technical skills. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by 2 months of professional scandal and legal battles. "I heard about the new practice," he said without looking up from his computer. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Catherine Reynolds is a smart choice for a partner. She has the kind of connections that can build a practice quickly. I studied his profile, searching for signs of the charm that had once convinced me. I was lucky to be chosen by him. Instead, I saw exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. "Darren, why didn't you just admit that we were equal partners? Why did you need to erase me completely?" He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Because I was terrified that if people knew how much you contributed, they'd realize how little I brought to the table." The honesty surprised me. For 8 years, Darren had projected absolute confidence in his own importance, his own brilliance, his own indispensable role in our success. "You brought plenty to the table. Client relationships, business development, project management. Those skills matter, but they're not architecture," he said quietly. "I wanted to be the architect, not just the businessman who managed the real architect. So you convinced yourself that taking credit for my designs would somehow make you more legitimate? I convinced myself that our success was proof I deserved the credit. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. Stupid, in retrospect, especially since the success was built on work I couldn't defend when challenged. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd once accepted his dismissive explanations about business structure and partnership roles. What will you do now? Patricia thinks we can get the license suspension reduced to a reprimand if I admit to some of the violations and agree to continuing education requirements. And if you can't, then I guess I'll find out what it's like to start over at 42. There was something pathetic about him sitting in his shrine to stolen accomplishments, clinging to the hope that he could salvage a career built on systematic fraud. But there was also something almost human about his admission of fear and inadequacy. Darren, I want you to know something. When I filed that licensing complaint, it wasn't about destroying you. It was about protecting my ability to practice architecture. I know, he said, which is what makes it worse. I left him sitting in his study and walked through the house one final time. In the master bedroom, I found the framed photograph of our wedding day, both of us young and optimistic, believing we were building something together that would last forever. I left the photograph where it was. That version of our story belonged to him now. That evening, May and I sat in her living room redesigning the guest bedroom that had become my temporary residence. Over the past month, we'd transformed it from a generic space into something that reflected my personality: clean lines, natural materials, carefully chosen artwork that included some of my own architectural sketches. I have something for you, May said, disappearing into her bedroom and returning with a small wooden box I'd never seen before. What is it? Letters from your grandmother. I was saving them for when you were ready to understand what they meant. I opened the box to find perhaps 20 letters written in elegant Chinese characters on thin paper that felt older than my lifetime. She wrote to me every month for 10 years after I immigrated, May explained. Most of the letters are about daily life, family news, business matters. But a few of them, she pulled out one letter with particularly careful handwriting. This one was written the year before she died. She was 87. May began translating, her voice soft but clear. Tell my granddaughter that a woman's strength is not measured by how quietly she can work, but by how loudly her work speaks for itself. Tell her that in America, she has opportunities I never had, to build something that belongs entirely to her. Tell her that when the time comes to choose between being safe and being authentic, she should choose authenticity every time. I felt tears gathering in my eyes as May continued. Tell her that the men who try to diminish her contributions are afraid of their own inadequacy. They take credit for her work because they cannot create work worthy of credit themselves. Tell her to build something so magnificent that no one can question who designed it. When did she write this? 1987. You were 3 years old. I held the letter carefully, trying to imagine the woman who'd written these words, a business owner in 1980s Taiwan. Someone who'd built an empire in a culture even more male-dominated than the one I'd navigated. How did she know? She didn't know your specific circumstances, but she knew what it was like to be an intelligent woman in a world that preferred intelligent women to stay invisible. May returned the letter to the box and handed it to me. She also knew that the strongest buildings are those with foundations deep enough to weather any storm. The next morning, I arrived at the Lynn, Reynolds and Associates office to find Elias waiting in the conference room with a thick folder and an expression of barely contained satisfaction. The licensing board issued their final ruling an hour ago, he announced. Darren Caldwell's architectural license has been permanently revoked. I sat down across from him, processing the magnitude of what he'd just said. Permanently? The board found clear evidence of systematic fraud, professional misconduct, and violations of ethical standards that warrant permanent license revocation. Elias opened the folder and pulled out the official ruling. They also issued a public censure detailing his violations, which will be published in the state professional newsletter. What about his appeal options? He can appeal to the state Supreme Court, but given the comprehensiveness of the evidence, it's unlikely to succeed. Elias smiled broadly. Avery, as of this morning, Darren Caldwell is permanently prohibited from practicing architecture. In Georgia, Catherine appeared in the conference room doorway. I hope that smile means good news. The best possible news, I replied. We no longer have to worry about competing with stolen designs. Perfect timing, Catherine said, settling into a chair beside me. Because I just got off the phone with 3 potential clients who saw the Chronicle feature about our sustainable design approach. They want to discuss projects for next year. I looked around the conference room at the partnership agreement. Hanging on the wall, at the project plans spread across the table, at the view of Atlanta's skyline through windows that framed the city where I would spend the next phase of my career building structures that bore my own name. For 8 years, I'd designed buildings while someone else designed my professional identity. I'd created innovations while someone else created the narrative about who deserved credit for those innovations. Now finally, I was designing both the buildings and the life of the architect who created them. May had been right about foundations. The strongest structures were those built deep enough to weather any storm. I was done weathering storms. It was time to build something magnificent. The rooftop garden of the West Side Veterans Center buzzed with conversation as Atlanta's architectural community gathered for the inaugural Lynn, Reynolds and Associates Sustainability Summit. I stood at the edge of the green space I'd designed, watching the sun set behind a skyline that now included 3 buildings bearing my name as the architect of record. 5 minutes until your keynote, Catherine said, appearing beside me with the kind of calm efficiency that had made our partnership stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. The AV team is ready, and Channel 11 just finished setting up their cameras. I nodded, smoothing the fabric of the navy dress I'd chosen for tonight, professional but approachable, confident but not defensive. A year ago, I'd been sitting in mediation sessions where my contributions were dismissed as technical skills. Tonight, I was the featured speaker at an event that had drawn architects from across the Southeast to discuss sustainable design innovations. Are you nervous? Catherine asked. Terrified, I admitted, but the good kind of terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something important. The kind that means I'm about to do something authentic. We walked back toward the presentation area, where 200 guests were taking their seats among the rooftop gardens and solar installations that powered the building's common areas. I spotted familiar faces in the crowd: Natalie from Westside Property Management, Marcus coordinating with the catering staff, Elias chatting with potential clients he'd helped us attract. In the front row, May sat with pride radiating from her expression. Beside her, Camilla Shore had her notebook ready, prepared to document tonight's event for the follow-up feature she was writing about the past year's transformation of Atlanta's architectural landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, Catherine announced. From the podium, please welcome the founding partner of Lynn, Reynolds and Associates, and the architect behind tonight's venue, Avery Lynn. The applause was warm and sustained, carrying none of the uncomfortable obligation I'd felt during Darren's award ceremonies. These people were clapping for work they knew I'd actually done, recognizing achievements I'd earned rather than inherited through association. I approached the microphone with the same careful attention I brought to designing load-bearing structures, understanding that the words I spoke tonight would support not just my own reputation, but the future of architects who'd been made invisible by others' ambitions. Good evening, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the rooftop space. When I designed this building 18 months ago, I envisioned it as a place where veterans could find community, support, and healing through thoughtful architecture. I never imagined it would also become a symbol of professional integrity and the importance of giving credit where credit is due. A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. Over the past year, my story had become something of a legend in Atlanta's design community, both cautionary tale and inspiration for architects who'd experienced their own struggles with recognition and attribution. Tonight, I want to talk about 3 principles that have guided both my architectural practice and my personal journey over the past year: transparency, collaboration, and the courage to build something authentic. I clicked to the first slide, which showed the architectural plans for the Veterans Center alongside photographs of the completed building. Transparency in architecture means that every structural element serves a clear purpose, and every design decision can be explained and defended. The same principle applies to professional relationships. When credit is given honestly and contributions are acknowledged accurately, we build practices that can withstand scrutiny. The next slide showed the partnership structure of Lynn, Reynolds and Associate, a simple organizational chart that clearly defined each partner's role and responsibilities. For too many years, I worked in an environment where my contributions were systematically minimized and my innovations were credited to someone else. I thought that was the price of professional success, that staying quiet and letting others take credit was somehow more noble than claiming recognition for my own work. I paused, scanning the audience and noting how many heads were nodding in recognition. How many architects had experienced similar erasure of their contributions? How many had accepted it as the cost of staying employed? I was wrong. Staying quiet doesn't protect anyone's interests except those who benefit from taking credit for work they didn't do. When we fail to claim our own achievements, we don't just harm ourselves, we harm every future architect who might face similar exploitation. The third slide showed a timeline of the past year's events: the licensing investigation, the media coverage, the establishment of our new practice, and the 3 major projects we'd completed under our own name. Which brings me to collaboration. Real collaboration requires trust, transparency, and mutual respect. It means that every partner's contributions are valued and acknowledged. It means that success belongs to everyone who helped create it. I gestured toward Catherine and Marcus, who were standing at the back of the audience. When Catherine Reynolds and Marcus Webb offered to partner with me, they weren't just offering business opportunities. They were offering something I'd never experienced before: a genuine collaboration based on shared vision rather than exploitation disguised as mentorship. The applause was spontaneous and warm, with several people turning to acknowledge Catherine and Marcus directly. But perhaps the most important principle is authenticity, courage to build something that genuinely reflects your values rather than something designed to meet other people's expectations. The final slide showed photographs of all 3 buildings we'd completed in the past year: the Veterans Center, a sustainable office complex in Midtown, and the affordable housing development that had won us recognition from the American Institute of Architects. A year ago, I was offered a substantial settlement to stay quiet about my professional experiences: $250,000 in exchange for silence about systematic credit theft and professional misconduct. The audience had grown completely quiet, understanding that they were hearing details about the settlement negotiations. For the first time, I turned down that money because I realized that silence would have been the most expensive thing I could have purchased. It would have cost me my integrity, my professional identity, and my ability to build something authentic with my own name attached to it. I clicked to a slide showing our current projects pipeline at 12 developments in various stages of design and construction, representing more than $15 million in contracted work. Today, Lynn Reynolds and Associates employs 8 people and has contracted projects valued at more than what I was offered to stay quiet. But more importantly, every project we complete carries the correct attribution for every person who contributed to its success. The applause this time was stronger, more sustained, with several people standing to acknowledge not just my words but the principle they represented. I want to close by sharing something my grandmother wrote in a letter to my mother 37 years ago. She said that a woman's strength is not measured by how quietly she can work, but by how loudly her work speaks for itself. I paused, thinking about May sitting in the front row, about the box of letters that had given me strength during the most difficult months of this journey. My grandmother built a business empire in Taiwan during an era when women were expected to remain invisible in professional settings. My mother built a successful accounting practice here in Atlanta, while teaching me the value of hard work and quiet competence. But it was my grandmother who understood something my mother and I had to learn the hard way: that quiet competence without recognition is just another form of exploitation. The next slide showed architectural plans for our newest project, a mixed-use development that would include affordable housing, commercial space, and community facilities designed specifically for immigrant families. This building will break ground next month. It will be designed by Lynn Reynolds and Associates, with my name listed as the architect of record. But more importantly, it will be built by a team of people whose contributions will be acknowledged, whose innovations will be credited, and whose professional growth will be supported rather than suppressed. I closed my presentation notes and looked directly at the audience. The architectural community has the power to create environments that either support authentic collaboration or enable systematic exploitation. The choice is ours. We can continue to tolerate practices that allow some people to build careers on other people's work, or we can insist on transparency, accuracy, and ethical recognition of contributions. The final slide was simple: a photograph of tonight's rooftop gathering, with the words "Building Authentic Success" overlaid in clean, modern typography. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for supporting a vision of professional practice based on integrity rather than expediency. The applause began before I'd stepped away from the microphone, and continued as I walked back to my seat. People were standing now, not just clapping, but cheering for something larger than my individual story, for a vision of professional practice that protected everyone's contributions, rather than just the contributions of those with the most power. As the formal program ended and guests moved toward the reception area, I was surrounded by architects, developers, and city planners who wanted to discuss both specific projects and larger questions about professional ethics. The conversations were energizing rather than draining, focused on building solutions rather than defending past decisions. Camilla appeared with her notebook and a satisfied expression. That was exactly the kind of speech that changes conversations. Can I quote you for tomorrow's article? Which part? The part about quiet competence being another form of exploitation. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. Near the edge of the rooftop, I found May standing alone, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. How does it feel to see your daughter up there? I asked, joining her at the railing. Like watching you finally become the architect you were always meant to be, she replied. Not just someone who designs buildings, but someone who designs the kind of professional life she wants to live. I learned that from you, and from grandmother. You learned the foundation from us, but the structure you built on top of it, that's entirely your own creation. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I stood in the rooftop garden, surrounded by plants I'd chosen and lighting I'd designed, looking out at a city where I was finally building the career I'd always imagined possible. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw your speech on the news. Impressive building. Good luck with the practice. I showed the message to Catherine, who read it with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. How does it feel to get his approval? She asked. Completely irrelevant, I replied, deleting the message without responding. The only approval that matters anymore is my own. An hour later, as the catering staff finished cleaning up and the security team prepared to lock the building, I stood alone on the rooftop where I'd just delivered the most important speech of my professional life. The city lights stretched out below me, each building representing someone's vision, someone's innovation, someone's contribution to the skyline. Tomorrow, construction would begin on another building that would add my own mark to that landscape, not as someone's uncredited partner, but as the architect whose name would appear on every document, every award, every recognition. The project earned. I walked to the elevator that would take me down to the parking garage, then stopped and looked back at the space one more time. This building had been the first project where my name appeared as the sole architect of record. It had become the symbol of my professional rebirth, and the foundation for everything I'd built since. But more than that, it had become proof that the most elegant structures weren't those that hid their support systems. They were those that celebrated every element that made them strong. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.